This is Miles Paschini from FV Bank, and you're listening to the Bank On It Show with John Siracusa.
Now, without further ado, your host.
Here's Johnny.
You're listening to the Bank On It Show, a podcast established back in 2015. I'm your host and producer, John Siracusa. And I want to give a big thanks to my friends at OpenFin for continually supporting and sponsoring this show. This show is also supported by my podcast and video production company. If you're an enterprise-sized company in a highly regulated industry and you want to upgrade your podcast and video production or jumpstart your podcast or video miniseries, please visit us at listendeck.com. On this show, we get deep behind the stories of fintech founders and the ideas, methodology, and investment strategies of top fintech VCs. A double click into the people you hear the headlines about. These are the people who are building and investing in the future of fintech. Headlines by themselves can get you excited, but the stories will help you get to work. If you're looking to build, partner, or invest in fintech, this podcast is for you. If you like what you hear in today's episode, please feel free to give the show a 5-star rating in a podcast application of your choice. You can also follow me on Twitter and Medium at John Siracusa, JohnSiracusa, or on LinkedIn at Siracusa. In today's episode, I chat with Miles Paschini, founder and CEO of FV Bank. FV Bank, short for Fintech Ventures Bank, provides business and individual accounts, supports multiple currencies, international payments, and investment accounts, providing banking as a service to fintechs. So recording remotely with me today, I have Miles Paschini. Miles is a co-founder and CEO of FV Bank. Miles, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So can we get started with what exactly is FV Bank?
Certainly, yeah. So FV Bank, it's a bank, right? A lot of people get confused that it's something different, but we are a bank that has a mission to help fintech and blockchain companies get access to banking. And the banking industry has just traditionally shunned innovation in a lot of ways. There's a lot of things that have happened over the last 10 years with the introduction of Bitcoin and blockchain that are competitive to banking. And there needs to be a forum where innovative companies that are developing, better, faster, cheaper ways to do things have access to banking. And so we're trying to create this bridge where companies who are what I call fintech creators have access to banking. And so FV Bank is all about creating an environment where a fintech creator can get access to banking, which is a highly regulated, highly compliant environment. And so there's got to be, some controls around that, but they should still be able to get access and help them to develop new business models. And that's really what we're trying to do. In fact, FV stands for Fintech Ventures.
So why did you call it that for?
Well, I was in this business, really a payments business kind of my whole adult life. And one of the last projects that I was the co-founder of, we were developing essentially a product that bridged Bitcoin in particular and Visa debit cards. And we grew it to a very big business. We had around 1 million users in 70 countries. And we grew it to a very nice volume of, around a few $100 million a month in volume. And every single step of the way, we either had regulators or banks or payment processors creating friction. People didn't want those two industries to converge. And so when that business ended, kind of wrote down, well, what do I want to do next time differently? And one of those notes was own a bank so that we could create an environment where these types of product innovations could be fostered and develop. Blackhawk was a company I sold one of my prior businesses to, and then I was a co-founder of a company called Wavecrest, which is based in Gibraltar. And we were the ones who really invented the linking of a Bitcoin wallet to a Visa card.
So Wavecrest was a company you were mentioning before?
Yeah, I was a co-founder of that company. Well, we started out as like an enterprise payments company. That was the vision. We finally got traction in creating a product which created an intersection between Bitcoin and Visa cards. And we ended up developing kind of a whole new category that exists today. But at the time, this was back around 2012, 2013, everybody just put up friction, put up barriers to that business developing.
Why do you think that is?
People don't really understand blockchain and Bitcoin that well, even today. I mean, you got to remember that all money that we kind of understand today is issued by a central bank. So Bitcoin really represented the first form of money, if you will, that was not issued by a central bank. And so there was a lot of questions around is this legal? Is it being used for illicit purposes? What are the know your customer controls, if any? What are the anti-money laundering controls, if any, around the development of these industries? And so, naturally, like regulators who, by the way, run and control banks, they had a lot of concerns, justifiably so, as to how do these two industries, this, internet money and fiat money, how do these two things intersect? And so while, it's frustrating when you're a creator in that space, the decisions that people have made along the way, in particular regulators, they're understood as to why they're making those decisions.
Right. By creating your own bank, how are you able to change that?
Again, that's why you asked me, I started, well, it's banking, right? At the end of the day, banking is banking. It's the, managing of depository accounts, managing of payments in a regulated environment. And what's really different is, I give the people an example. If I was running a bank that was the agricultural bank of, Ohio, and a farmer came in and he said, hey, I've got 1,000 acres. I'm growing these crops. I need to buy a new tractor. I need to get a new barn, some new heavy equipment. The banker who's in the agricultural business, he would understand, like, what's the ROI in buying the new tractor? What's the future value of your crops? What's the benefit of having a new barn with new machinery? And he would be able to underwrite the risk of that farmer who's looking to get a loan against all of those things, or maybe even loan against the future value of the crops that he's going to develop. And that's just specializing, right? That banker understands how to underwrite that risk in that particular area. And so we're building a bank where we're understanding how do you underwrite risk and how do you understand risk in the blockchain and fintech space. And so at the core, we're still a bank. We have deposit accounts, we make payments. We have all the KYC, AML regulation that any other bank has, but we're building a specialty around understanding the risks associated and how to manage the risks associated in a particular vertical. So if you're a farmer and you came to FE Bank, we would not know how to underwrite your risk, right? But if you're a crypto exchange, we understand your business and we understand the inherent risks and we understand how to put controls around that so that we can help you get access to banking.
We talked a little bit about your experience prior to creating FE Bank. And I'm just curious, though. So you have a co-founder at FE Bank. How did you guys meet?
So my co-founder's name is Nitin Agarwal, and we met while I was at Wavecrest. So it's an interesting story. I think it's a great story for me. Is Nitin joined the company as a kind of a mid-level to senior product manager.
Okay.
And we had around 250 people. So in the middle of the sea of a good small-sized company. And he's just one of those people that was always trying to do more. He was always trying to be seen in the team. And long story short is one day I was in India and put a challenge to him, and he was never in the sales team. He was always in like creating products. He's a product specialist. And I put a challenge to him and I said, hey, do you want to do something in sales? He said, yeah. So I said, if you reach this certain goal by this certain time, you'll get this certain commission, which was very attractive in relation to, let's say, the salary at that time. And he just knocked it out of the park, right? He did like, I don't know, maybe 10x of what the goal was. So Nitin and I, we became, whenever you got somebody who's driving top line revenue in a company, the co-founders get close to them. And so Nitin and I got very close, and we see things a lot alike, and we're quite different, but we also see some things in a very similar way. And so as our relationship carried through Wavecrest, when Wavecrest ended, we were very, very close, and we had a lot of similar understandings about what the future could offer and what we wanted to do. And so when we departed from Wavecrest, we basically set out to start some businesses together. So it's a great story of where do you find founders, right? You find founders of people who have a passion about doing things differently and doing things better. And that's how Nitin and I got together. We had a commonality that we wanted to do things that other people, weren't necessarily doing. And so, yeah, that's how we met. We met on the job, if you will, but we met, I think, out of a mutual respect of how people can look at the world differently and try to do things that everyone else isn't already doing.
Some of the best piece of advice that you received, like something that you even use till today?
Definitely when it comes to like dealing with parties of authority that you need to deal with. I mean, yeah, definitely slow down, articulate yourself better, make sure that you convey that you understand like the foundation, and then you can share your enthusiasm about a particular thing. I mean, that's been a great advice. I had another mentor that told me once that every good deal dies 3 times. And at first I didn't really understand it. And then you come to realize that, failure or failure in a particular transaction or failure in a particular direction that you're going is part of it. Like that is going to happen. And you have to have the strength to and the willingness to go through and keep trying, right? So the every good deal dies 3 times is like part of that meaning to me is that you may try something. People may tell you that you can't do this. It won't work. It's not allowed. And then you got to keep trying to figure out a way to make it work.
The hard part, though, is just to continue to go, right? Like when you're in the moment, it's very easy to read about it or hear advice about it, right? But when you go through it, and if you want to call it when the rubber meets the road or whatever it is, when it actually happens, it's really hard to stay focused at that moment. How do you do that?
For me, it comes natural. I mean, I certainly have had points in my career where failure has really brought me down, but I guess it's just that desire to just keep trying to figure out a way, or maybe it's, the fear of, I tell people I've never really had a job in my life, and it's maybe that fear of having to have a job has kept me trying, right? But I think it's the best part of being an entrepreneur. So a lot of people just think, oh my gosh, you're an entrepreneur and you get to do whatever you want to do, and it's so great. But it's really the challenge that's the best part. It's the failure and figuring out, well, how do I turn that no into a yes? Some great books I read a long time ago, about telemarketing. It's like when you make a phone call and people tell you no, that you have to just consider that you're just one phone call closer to a yes, right? Because statistically, somebody's going to say yes. And those kind of little things have stuck in my mind. So we try things, we try stuff in the development of our business, and sometimes they don't necessarily work out. And then you got to figure out another way to attack it. And so that's kind of, I don't know, I think that's the joy of being an entrepreneur, is that you're just constantly learning.
Absolutely. Now, to your point about the call, right? I remember I've also created a bunch of companies in my past, and I remember one company, I think I made 1,000 cold calls in 3 months, and I think I heard 998 no's. It was so painful. Now, at that point, if you've ever faced something like that, that is very, very painful. And, just reading advice or hearing things like just keep going, you're closer to yes, is really not something that you can relate to at that moment. That's when it's hard. How do you continue that?
I guess part of it, right, is there's total failure. A lot of people create solutions to problems that don't exist. People say, oh, I have a great idea. Well, nobody has a problem with that idea, right? So no one's going to buy it. And I think, in your point, it's if you made 999 calls, the 1,000th call could have been, made you a multimillionaire, possibly, right? Or the 1,000th call could have been a no, and you might have to accept the fact that your sales pitch or your business idea just wasn't any good. I watch a lot of Shark Tank. I think it's a great experiment, right? And I love it when they just tell them, your idea sucks. Because sometimes...
It does, yeah.
Yeah, people need to hear that, right? And no one's going to buy it, move on and do something else. Now, sometimes that can be a very good ending point for you to reassess and move on to something else. But sometimes that can just build your resolve and go, no, this is great, and I'm going to keep trying.
I was very young when I did those cold calls, and it was a new business that I created. It was I think it was the first business I created when I was in my 20s and so on. So I was very naive. And yes, I learned from that event. Because I put the dedication in to actually make those calls, even after I heard no over and over and over again, what I learned was that the model was no good because nobody really cared. So I'm trying to sell them something that they don't really care about. And so I think I learned from there a valuable lesson, which is the second part you mentioned, which is to create something that is solving a problem that people really care about and are willing to pay for. And that's when, I think by going through it and just keep hitting a brick wall, even though it was ridiculous, I learned probably one of the most valuable lessons. And so do you find that when you go through experience, it's either you learn how to tweak and move on or whatnot, and sometimes you learn a valuable lesson that you couldn't learn unless you had that deep experience?
Yeah, I mean, that's what failure does, right? Is it teaches you things, whether it's in a relationship or whether it's in your business. When something goes wrong, you should ideally learn something from it. And that happens in business. I mean, I've tried to sell products and services that were not giving the result that you would want, right? Regardless of how much money or time you invested, you just weren't getting the result you wanted. And that's usually because, a lot of cases, because the buying audience just doesn't understand what you're trying to sell them. They don't need what you're trying to sell them. I mean, a good example is an FV Bank. We're almost 2 years live now with customers, and we don't have a sales team. Right? We have a solid pipeline of business. We don't have a sales team, and it's because we've gotten lucky. We figured out a product and service intersection that people really need. There's much more demand than there is supply for this particular service that we're offering. And so that's when you get lucky. Like you figure out like where's the gap in a particular market. And if you can fill that gap, then, selling is easy. That's the easiest part of the business right now. And knock on wood, because that may not be the case in the future.
Yeah. So what happens when that's not the case in the future? Or if that happens, not just for every bank, but like just in general, like I've interviewed a lot of entrepreneurs, which they don't have a sales team because there's way more demand than options available, right? And so selling is actually quite easy. But what happens when it flips on its head and it starts to flip a little bit? What do you do at that point?
Well, you have to have had the experience to build out I'll call it a traditional sales function, which is typically a funnel, where you prospect, you qualify leads, you move them through the process of being a buying customer. So you have to have the ability to set up that kind of a structure in your organization. And that's kind of where we are at right now in FE Bank, even though we don't see our pipeline slowing down per se, but we're starting to build that, call it more mature sales process, because you don't want to do that when it's too late. You want to start building out that, you start out with a prospecting function, which is speaking to the broadest universe of people who may be interested in your product or service, and then qualifying them into potential customers, and then going through the actual sales process, selling them. So we're starting that now in anticipation that in the future, we won't be so fortunate as we are right now with the way the pipeline exists. So I think it's timing, understanding some businesses have to start there like on day one.
Yeah.
But some businesses, you get kind of this fortunate period where you're at the right place at the right time. But you do need to build that process. Otherwise, you'll look around one day and there's no more new customers, and that's not a good place to be in.
Yeah. So you're saying to see it before it's needed, right? So this is, maybe you see over the next year or so, it's not going to change where, you need this team, but starting to build it now will prepare you for whatever may happen in whatever time frame. I'm sure you're not going to be able to even predict the exact day and time it's going to happen. So what's the first thing you do in order to start to build it out? Do you bring in somebody? Does your co-founder manage that? How do you go about it?
The first thing is to anticipate what's going to happen. So in our case, I think the industry is going to get more and more regulated. Mm-hmm. But as more regulation comes into play and there's more clarity around regulation, then more financial institutions will be willing to get involved, which means there'll be more competition. And so we see in 12 months, 24 months, there'll be a lot more competition. So that means we need to, offer a better product or service, better price points, cast a broader net in who we bring in, as clients. And so we see that coming. We're looking 18, 24 months down the road, and we're starting to get ready now.
That's awesome. You mentioned somebody who was like a mentor to you. Like, was there anyone else that was highly influential to your character, like early on or even today?
My biggest influence was when I was 9 years old. I had a great uncle. Unfortunately, my parents got divorced when I was young. So I had a great uncle come in, and he's going to save the situation, help me out. And so, long story short, he took me to the golf course. He said, "You're going to learn to play golf, and I got you a job at the golf course shagging golf balls." On my first day there, he said, "Meet the pro." Guy's name was Alan. He said, "You need a set of golf clubs if you're going to play golf. And so you don't have any money, so Alan's going to give you a loan." And so this guy, Alan, gave me a loan. I think it was like $100. And I got my first set of brand new golf clubs. I was in debt, and I had a job at 9. I worked at that job until I was 17, until I went off to college. Pretty much every day of my life, I played golf. I shagged golf balls, paid off my debt, learned how to hustle on the golf course. That's probably the single biggest influence in my life, was work ethic, understanding the balance between the joy of playing golf and working and paying off debt. And I just learned so many lessons on the golf course and from that opportunity that he gave me.
So Miles, you mentioned some challenges you faced early on as you were building and so on, but were there any particular challenges that you faced that still stick with you today that you remember?
Oh yeah, I mean, definitely. For the Forum of Entrepreneurs, probably one of the most crushing events I had was a VC that had invested in one of my companies called EWI. And create the long story short, there was a company that invested in us, like $8 million, but that company was owned by a large U.S. bank. The company got sold and the bank became the shareholder. So in the first board meeting that I had with the board member who was from this bank, he took me in the hallway and he said, "Hey, I just want to let you know I'm so-and-so from this bank. I'm representing the investment. And I just want to let you know that I've written off this investment." He was my largest independent shareholder and investor. And the first day I met him, he told me he had written off the investment. And he said,
Oh my God.
"I buy banks on corners in small towns. I don't do early stage investments." So I had to face the fact that this person who had significant shareholder rights, had a significant amount of money invested in the company, had basically just told me that this was unimportant to him. And I had to live through that. And it was a very, very difficult process. And so one thing I always remember is that, when I look at financing and raising money for the company, is how to make sure that we protect ourselves from that type of thing happening where you have like a disengaged or disenchanted or just someone who's, investor who's changed their investment thesis, and protect yourself against that. But that was a hard roadblock. And I've had that a few times, where the parties that you're involved with, like at the senior level, important level of your organization, they have a change of course, right? And so you got to reconcile those differences. And that's tough as an entrepreneur because you want to just drive your vision,
Yeah.
You want to make, and then you have these opposing forces that want to do things differently.
I could only imagine what that feels like.
Walking into a board meeting, which I had a lot of good mentorship around carrying myself in a board meeting and how to represent myself and how to deal with boardroom activities. I walked into that board meeting and I was kind of like empty-brained. I didn't really know what to think because here I was just being told that this person that I was going to try to get aligned with where we're going to go has already told me that forget about it. So yeah, it was challenging. I mean, I've had some other interesting stuff. Like I hired a CEO in one of my companies because I wanted to be the visionary and I wanted to be, so I hired a CEO and at the time I didn't understand at all. He took me and he said, this is like within a month of hiring me, he said, "Miles, my job is to get rid of you." And I didn't, and it just created, I was younger. I was probably like 28 years old. And I just went crazy. I'm like, wait a minute, I just like hired you as the CEO to help me run this company. And you've just told me that your job is to get rid of me. And I didn't understand it, right? And it was a really bad friction for like a couple of years. Now I understand what he meant, right? I mean, I understood that he needed to build an organization that could scale without any one person. And I was like, the company was super, as are many early stage companies, they're super dependent on the founder, right? And so I didn't understand that, right? And I had to overcome, I had to get mature enough to understand that while that sounds painful, it's actually the right thing to do for the business.
So if you don't mind, can we go to some fun questions about you?
Certainly.
So do you have any hobbies, or if you want to geek out on something, what do you geek out on that has nothing to do with FV Bank?
Oh, well, my biggest passion has got to be motorcycles. People who know me know, but if you don't know me, I've been riding motorcycles, since I was around 20 years old. And said earlier how I got a place out in South Dakota. I got that from riding my motorcycles from the West Coast out to Sturgis, South Dakota every year. So I'm really into old Harleys. And, if I could just quote, be retired and just do things unrelated to work, I'd be working on motorcycles. I like the artistic part of it. I like there's so much mechanically that I would like to learn. I mean, I'm just like a novice garage motorcycle assembler person who's learning. I'm at the very early stage of learning, right? So, but I love working on motorcycles and I would love to grow that part of my knowledge, but I like to ride, collect them. Yeah. So motorcycles is probably my weakness and things I like to do outside of the work.
What was the funniest thing that you messed up?
Oh, well, the first motorcycle that I ever built I built it with a friend about 15 years ago. And we were going from California to South Dakota. And we put the bike together weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. Cases of wine were consumed in the process. Anyways, we finally got it together. It was around 11 or 12 o'clock, time to leave, and go on our 6-day journey. We made it about an hour and a half and parts were literally falling off onto the freeway.
Oh my God.
So lesson learned is Loctite is a very important part of assembling a motorcycle, right?
Yeah.
But, your first one, you're just did you tighten everything? Yeah, we tightened everything. We didn't put Loctite on anything.
Oh God. Loctite, for people who don't know, it's a chemical that actually holds the bolts in place.
Yeah, so an hour later, we were having a motorcycle yard sale on the freeway.
Well, especially a Harley, they're so loud and they shake so much that these bolts will come right off if you don't Loctite it.
Yeah, it only took an hour or so. And they were falling apart. So yeah, I mean, silly stuff like that where, it was pretty funny. Just hear this motorcycle that we had worked, weeks and weeks and weeks, and maybe months on. And literally parts were falling off on the freeway.
Oh my God. I could just imagine. That must have been, very funny in retrospect. Probably not very funny when you were in the moment.
No, I mean, now I can assure you that when I put the motorcycle together, I'm torquing things to the spec and if there's a manual, and I'm putting Loctite, right? I've learned that lesson already.
That's great. And so Miles, now that we're coming to the end of the interview, I want to leave off on a final question I ask everybody. Like, if you could spend a day with anyone ever, whether the person is still alive or past, who would it be and why that person?
My first choice would definitely be my mom and dad. They've both passed, and so, to take an extra day with them would be amazing. But outside of that, it would definitely be Elon Musk. That would just be an amazing opportunity to sit and pick his mind for a day.
What would you ask him?
Well, hopefully I would do a lot of listening, but I just think like somebody who first of all, I think he's incredibly intelligent, possibly alien. But, when you have whatever it is, $100 billion plus, the whole concept of materialistic things in your life are certainly out the window, right? You could buy anything you want, right? And so a lot of, I find like so many people are just driven by, I want to get a new house, or I want to get a new car, or I want to save money, put my kids to college. Like everything is driven by money. So imagine a world where not only you don't even think about that anymore. I mean, you don't have to think about it for the rest of your life, but you're also super brilliant and you're thinking of things that are like beyond. I mean, he's thinking about habitation on Mars. He's thinking about, a world where we drive underground and totally autonomous vehicles. And anyways, it's just really far out thoughts, which I would love to just dig into understanding, like what motivates you when money's no object. If you have a particular dream or vision, you can just go for it. And he does, right? I mean, and so I think it would be an amazing day. I would definitely like to sit with Elon Musk for the day.
And awesome. And on that point, Miles, I want to say thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me. It's been a good time.
Now, that was a great interview, and I want to personally thank Miles for being a guest on my show and OpenFin for sponsoring. But more importantly, I want to thank you, the audience, because if it wasn't for you, we wouldn't exist. And although this show is over, I look forward to seeing you Thursday morning while I'll be releasing my remotely recorded interview with Rishi Khosla from Oak North. See you real soon.
It's over, Johnny. It's over!